So, one more class in our long list of classes. The Big Four, designed to enable you to ease into a conversation, not take any emotional positions. You can if you want, but just having a discussion about us, it ought to be easy, right? Some topics yes, some topics no. So the question that was asked was with the intent of you never know what conversation you're going to have with someone. You don't know where they come from. You don't know what their experiences are. And people can come to us about Christ from the entire conversational spectrum, right? A member of the body just asking questions all the way to the other end, which is someone who has never even been introduced to the Lord, and they're asking questions about the construct of our worship corporately. So the question was, and maybe that day either the opening or closing wasn't to their liking when they came to me, but the question was, why? Why do we have these? And it was asked almost in exactly that same tone. So, anyone want to start with a guess? What? Wow, I love that. So I know when to go home. Okay, we've got the closing prayer covered. So, thank you for that, Gail. Not too far off, though. Right. So Hans said Christ taught to pray. Yes, he did. This is not about that. But we're going to touch that subject because you can't get to corporate worship structure discussing prayer without going through prayer.
So the closing prayer probably at least semi-based on what happened at the Last Supper. Because if you remember, they sang a hymn and they went out. A hymn, a prayer.
Maybe. So Gene says let's tie it all the way back in Scripture to the Lord's Supper, which isn't a bad place to start. In fact, we'll get there very quickly in our discussion of Scripture about opening and closing prayer.
I've always looked at the opening prayer as a way to help us to begin to focus on what we're
All right. Wade says an opening prayer is to make you focus your mind. So now we've touched on an opening and a closing, and we're very close to completion, and we could be done in 10 minutes. So earliest class ever.
Expanding off of what Gene just said, so it's scriptural to close with him.
So now we have counter battery fire from Fred. Fred says if they close with a hymn in the New Testament, we should be closing with a hymn now. Did I get the foot stomp right? Okay. A position. We'll talk about that. So we're going to start with Scripture, right? We look at Scripture, we look at tradition, we look at preference, and then you get to go judge yourself in a bathroom. So last week, we talked a whole lot about corporate worship and structure. And that was what we came up with, right? Now, this is not a modern synagogue. This is an Old Testament, early New Testament synagogue. How their corporate worship structure looks. Just so if you walk into a synagogue anywhere, it feels like a Walmart, you're getting the same service, everything is on the same aisle that it's supposed to be, and you know how to operate. We went through Acts and the rest of the New Testament, and we see those pieces of what we put together as our worship service come together in those 3 books. Okay? So that at the end of it, you've got the component parts that you can assemble into a worship structure any way you want. I'm ambivalent about rank and order. For some things, we've agreed on what our core is, and we'll talk about that potentially, if not today, certainly as another topic. So all the pieces, parts there are assembled, right, when you get to the end of Colossians. They repeat them in the other books, but this is where they're introduced, in order. All right, so that's what you get, right? This is the way. That's what your mom taught you, and it's what Dad reinforced, and it's what you know. Am I wrong? Because I think for the last 2 weeks, we've agreed that this is the way. Hans?
I would say that it was just something that Elder Ryder did. I don't remember my mother one-on-one saying this is the way it has to be.
I can actually see your mother saying, this is the way it has to be, Hans.
And we don't always do it this way. By the way, you left out singing before the opening prayer.
What? So there's a reason for that. Gene touched on, other than it's just flat a mistake on my part, I'm going to try to cover my shame and just say, yeah.
I mean, we sometimes put the sermon before the Lord's Supper, and other places traditionally do the Lord's Supper at the end. I mean,
Right, so Rod's got a quarter blaspheme for us, but you're all a component part of that. We do change up the order, don't we? We've had sermons about the Lord's Supper, using the Lord's Supper as a component of the sermon throughout. We've put the Lord's Supper last, we've put the Lord's Supper first, depending upon where we wanted to go that day with the lesson plan, and or whether or not we just wanted to make you feel a little uncomfortable, because probably not something that needs to be poured in concrete because it's not necessarily relevant.
In Scott City, we always started with a prayer. I like the fact that we start with a song because that's kind of a call to worship. Everybody's chit-chatting and everything. And they're praying. When you start a prayer right away,
Right.
there's some people that are not involved in that prayer because they're still being seated, getting situated.
I had to read your name tag. That's why I disappeared from view. Colleen. The names escape me. And so what Colleen said was in Scott City, where we do it right, we do it that way. She accepts that you start with a song, Gene, but it's not really what she wants. I'm just paraphrasing. No, I'm teasing, because I'm going to make a point with it. Because she started to get incensed, right? She was going to come up at me. Because that's the way this gets, and it's okay sometimes to be, we should be emotional about our worship, but we've got to be emotional about the right components. She understands why we do the call to worship. She accepts that. She thinks it's okay and acceptable, but she's seen it both ways, which helps build a little bit of strength in how we understand it. And then correct every part of that I just got wrong, Colleen. No, she starts with a no. Yeah, I am deaf. I am. So, you have no idea how many times I have played the "what you said isn't what I heard" game with people. I was playing it last night. Yes, ma'am.
I think it comes down to being comfortable and uncomfortable. Right, this is the steel rope. This is our steel rope.
That's going to sound good over the mic.
So if I come in and somebody's in my spot because this is assigned to Megan, it's uncomfortable.
That's right. That's right.
I think this entire thing goes back to, yes, obviously scripture thing, but it's comfortable or uncomfortable. What's comfortable for the Manhattan Church of Christ may not be comfortable.
All right, so the first thing Megan said was, "Don't sit in my seat." Because we get attached to things. And it's about comfortability. When you come in every Sunday, you know where you're mentally going to be and where you're prepared to be. And we have to be careful. I have lost control. And we have to be careful about the things that we do for personal comfort and ease, that they overtake us and become tradition. And that was an excellent transition, and thank you, because that's what we're talking about here. Scripture says that they had worship. Scripture gives us all the components. Scripture mentions them out of what you might call the sequence every single time. So there isn't one. It's not set. If it were set, we'd be talking about what was set. And so it's all malleable. So it's mostly tradition and a lot of preference, but I'm going to give mostly tradition. So how about that as a statement? Talk about us. And you can make this go as far back as you want. It doesn't just have to be the Church of Christ. You can go all the way back to the Protestant church. You can go to the Baptist church. You can go to the Catholic church. You can go to the first church established in any city in Central and Eastern Europe, right? The intent was to establish some form of order. That's Corinthians, right? That's the entire argument of this chaos you've created in worship because you have no order. And it's not worship. It's chaos. Well, how would you feel if we came in here every Sunday and you didn't know what was going to happen? There could be a trapeze artist. I don't know what that has to do with worship, but they could be here. It's on the table of things that are theoretically possible. You wouldn't know what to expect. You wouldn't know if you were going to worship God that day. That would be chaos.
Well, I'll tell you on Megan's comment about comfort and comfort.
First, just say that you support that that's her role. That's what she needs. Give her that emotional support.
Realize that, but I also think that there are times when we allow comfort to be introduced where it conflicts with doctrine. People do not attend where they are uncomfortable. And it's
Yeah.
a delicate balance that we need to achieve, but we still need to maintain the doctrine as we go forward instead of looking at people's comfort level.
That's a great topic that we might have to address. So the issue was, what is your priority? Is it Scripture? Which you use the term doctrine. Is it Scripture? Is it tradition? Is it preference? And wrapped up in those last two, you can put inside one single bubble of comfort. And I think the danger there is that when we start using comfort as a priority, it becomes about us and not about God. I'm not here to be, I am here with you. I enjoy the time we spend together as Christians worshiping our God. I'm here to worship my God. Endanger that at your own peril. Can I say it that strongly? And then we'll talk about which one of us are absolutely in peril. But Hans.
I think what I heard,
Mike. But I got the name right.
is that the comfort I looked for each time I was in a Church of Christ was, are they preaching the doctrine of the Bible? That was what, and yes, I can tell if it wasn't. Because it was something, not that they weren't following Scripture, it's not the arrangement of the worship so much as, was I comfortable with the fact that they were or were not teaching Scripture?
Right. So what's your litmus test when you enter a house of worship? No, you just said it. Hans said, when I go to worship anywhere in a Church of Christ, I expect that it'll be doctrinally sound, and I want that assumption to be validated. Is that fair? No. I'll give you the list. That's the list, right? We're back to that. This is the way.
My wife whispered in my ear, she goes back further than anybody else in this room, and that Church of Christ, that there was a time when her dad was an elder, when they were mixing it up in order to get
Yeah.
out of the comfort zone and get used to the idea that it didn't have to be.
Yeah, and that's important, and we've done that. The current eldership has done that. I can think at least 3 times, and then as many again times where part of the worship was why we did it, where we'll just mix it up so that we don't pour concrete on our shoes and walk into the ocean.
So, a couple things. I think the majority of people come to church initially because of selfish reasons, right? Like, I just test hot climates, and so I just didn't want to end up in one. And so you start off with things of that nature. Then over time, I think you grow to realize it's just not about you, right? And so then you stay through it. But I don't think initially when people come in, especially if they're unknowing and aren't well versed in the Bible or whatnot, they don't know north from south or what it is, what truth really is. I mean, that's why there's a bajillion denominations of Christianity, because it comes back to comfort level and that stuff that's there. I mean, we're in a town of almost 60,000 people, and maybe 5,000 show up to church. Why? Because it makes you feel uncomfortable, because you've been a drunken heathen for 6 years.
I hope you were recording that, because that's a whole sermon right there. That'd be hilarious.
So I think, so all of that kind of comes together, right? I mean, to a certain extent, the reason almost everybody here has been at this church for more than a weekend or two and has some long, strong foundations of truth that, at least as we see it, right, and through the
Right.
Bible and understanding of it.
So I'll paraphrase what Dwayne said. So always remember that the person sitting next to you may not have any idea why they're there that day. There's grace involved in that, and there's an extension of knowledge that's implied on your behalf as we meet and talk to each other. Some disparity is allowed across, sects, denominations, congregations, whatever you want to call them. But the important point is that we help each other on our walk to maturity so that you understand why you're here and that it's not about you. Is that a good enough summary, Dwayne? Okay. Wade, and then we're going to move.
I think sometimes our expectations, like, I expect if I go back home and attend church there, it's going to be very similar to what I have here. I could go all across this country, I could go see. There's that expectation that there's going to be some kind of order that I'm familiar with, and that's kind of what I expect, and I think that's a lot of what we expect. When we come on Sunday morning to worship, we kind of expect this is the way it's going to be.
All right, so we'll narrow the conversation down a little bit, because we widened it out. So remember, don't get hung up on this is the way. We're talking about the open and closing prayer, right? So I kind of figured at this point we might have lost a little bit of focus. So narrow your aperture a little bit, dial it down, and talk about opening and closing. So here we are, back to the opening question. Traditionally, what's the purpose? Focused worship. All right, giving our reverence to God. I don't disagree with either of those. I just wrote down what I've heard all my life in the church in an opening prayer. Thought about, I didn't write everyone down, but I thought about what the components were that people do. What do we do? What do I hear when I hear people open the worship service with a prayer? There was a hand. Sir.
There's also a defining line also. This is where the worship begins, thus sets a different set of rules. We have a different set of rules for this is the lesson together as we gather, where we participate. We call this is the line. And
Yes.
from this point only, this is where the men, the eldership, the leaders begin to serve the congregation within itself. I mean, we're fighting where
Yeah.
back in history where they may not have got up and made a clear distinction of, okay, let's begin.
Right, because the whole thing was so much in the very beginning when we didn't have order. When everybody has a gift, or most people have a gift, and everyone has an epiphany in their soul that week about how they were able to do something for the Lord, and we're all gathering together and we're all sharing that all day long. So it's a little bit different. So, did that hit all three of the things that we just discussed? Sir.
A little off point, but what was part of Jesus' remark at the Last Supper? Do
Let's eat.
this in remembrance of me.
Right.
Focus thing, I think, is part of what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to be. So this might touch some of you a little too close, but if it does, just roll with it. Have you ever been in a worship service where every prayer was a sermon? Have you ever participated in the never-ending prayer? Okay. Be cognizant of what your function and role is. The more you think about it, the less scary it's going to be, and the more likely you are to be able to do it in a way that makes you comfortable with what you've done. And so I typically hear that we do these three things. We praise and thank God. I hear that virtually every time. What you don't know that you're doing is that we are invoking or paying homage to the presence of God in our worship. He's there. But I almost always hear people thank Him for that in some form. Usually we thank Him for our being able to get together, and He's there with us. And then it prepares us. It's that cut line between the gathering song, sitting down and shutting up and focusing our minds on what's about to be done as we worship our God. Was that too much? Sitting down and shutting up, is that too hard? Ha! Pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing was not authorization for the never-ending prayer. Pray without ceasing is a lifestyle. I am constantly thinking and talking to God throughout my day, mostly because it's the people, yeah, you know.
But it's an awareness every day,
Yeah.
every hour. But here on the opening, closing prayer, it's focused.
Yeah. So we're prepared. Are we ready now? We've had an opening prayer. Is your mind focused? Do you think about where you're at and what you're about to do? Or are we just rolling with it? Just get through that opening prayer so I can do my next song. I'm not that excited about singing because I don't do it well, but I know people who are and do. Fred.
Tell me if this is off topic, but why do we suddenly change our demeanor when we start our worship?
Wonderful question. So why do you guys all change when we start worship? Fred said, why do we change our demeanor? Yeah. Yeah. So Fred's calling me out. And that's okay. I'll accept blame for me. Despite all of my efforts to try to be a good son and a right Christian, not right so much of the day. But when I come here, every other distraction that makes me fail and suck at my Christianity is removed. It's just you, it's just me, and it's just God. And there is nowhere I feel more comfortable with my soul. That's why my demeanor changes, Fred, because I suck as a Christian. I'm trying to get better.
Well, I think it also refers back to history in the Old Testament, where, let's just use Moses. Moses finds the burning bush, and his demeanor definitely changed.
Yeah.
And from that to the priesthood, where God demanded that the priest would go through a ceremony to be purified.
Yeah.
Be able to bring things to Him, and continued on through the Old Testament into the New Testament when Jesus again reached back into the Old Testament, at least for his final Passover, and certainly there was a change of attitude within that ceremony.
Yeah. So Gene's talking about a couple of different things for our wider viewing audience. Location and presence are impactful. This is not holy ground, but I like to think of it as some form of it because I'm here with my God, but I'm not giving it a capital H and a capital G. When you're in the presence of God, you should be a little bit concerned, a little bit afraid, overwhelmingly joyful, and happy that He's there with you, and all those things mixed together. And so we should feel a certain way when we come into worship. Our goal would be that it goes everywhere with us, that we pick that up and it's just part of our little hobo stick with a bag and it's who I am. Life interferes, and good luck with that. And when you master that, you must come share that with me because I need that information. And so we'll go through a couple of questions, but we're running out of time and I haven't even nailed you to the cross yet on your preferences.
Same thing though with prayer at home. When you find a quiet place, you have the same feeling of being closer to God at that point in time than any other time throughout the day.
You just stole my sermon 2 weeks from now. So have you ever had that moment of prayer or conversation with God where you felt comfort? I hope that you do. And the moment that you do, it's overwhelming. If you allow yourself not to experience it for just one moment and consider what just occurred. It's amazing. It'll bring you to tears if you're not careful. Or is it if you're overly hard-hearted? Not sure. Dwayne.
I think also, like, it's kind of like going and you sit tall, you speak correctly, you know, you don't act like a jackwagon, things of that nature, right? It's a point of reference, it's often of respect.
That's a colloquialism. We'll allow it.
You comb your hair and all that other stuff, like, you know, you present yourself a little bit better just because it's a point of respect.
Are there people in your life whom you are a better you in front of? Dwayne used the great grandparents analogy from a different time, right? A little bit more stern time. Grandpa's kind of like shoulders straight, chest out, stand up tall, or knuckles on the back of your head. And so you behave a certain way around them. And if that's the starting relationship with God, at least you're starting. God's a little bit different than that overall, but so were your grandparents. Nobody shows as much unconditional love as somebody who is close to you like that. Hans.
I talk a lot.
No.
It's not true. But because I have to. But when I come here, and I think it's the miracles where you can sit 110 people down, and they're here specifically to listen more than we speak. And that is what we do together when we worship. We listen, and we are here through the song, through the prayers. And it's those prayers we need to listen to as well. So this is the one time in all of our days, whoever's in charge of many people or not, this is where we come to, as you praise, shut up, but to be able to sit and be quiet and listen and exist, just speak.
Yeah, it's hard to calm your modern mind. I think it's more difficult than it was in the past. I could be wrong. They may have had their own generational distractions, but I think your distractions now come in a handheld device that is constantly chirping for your attention. And it takes some discipline to ignore it. But learn it you must while you're here. So let's get back on track, though. If we agreed on those three things for an opening prayer, what's your closing prayer? Someone said it earlier. Go home, right? Good day to you. I like that one. When I good day you, we're done. Good day to you. I say good day. And I have exited the conversation. Or if I overly agree with you when you said something you know to be wrong, then I've just kind of judged the conversation stupid and I'm agreeing, so we're done. 2 and 2 is 5? Absolutely yes. And I've got to go. So we do this. We thank God for coming. Which is a weird thing to say, but that's what you did, isn't it? We ask him to guide, direct us till our next meeting. That's how I was raised to say it. I was actually given the phrase. And I just adopted it because it was the expectation. On the Sunday mornings in which I was in, doing closing prayer and I didn't say it, I was asked that way. It was specifically, why didn't you ask God to charge us? Or why didn't you charge God to protect us? I was like, wow, okay. And I started making my checklist because I realized I was being graded on performance. And now it is what it is. And so, Mike.
I think in Kathy's like this, it helps us prepare ourselves to go back into the world.
Man, did you just steal our last preference? Yes, you did. So, yes, it's the exit, right? And so, I like the way that Hans had said it before, I think. When you're about to enter the mission field and you can only ask God for one thing, what do you ask for? Because that's what the rest of the world is to a Christian. So enough of tradition, are we okay? That's what my spiritual fathers taught me an opening and closing prayer was. It can be other things. But that's what I always hear come out of the microphone. So what are your preferences about them? Some I didn't put on here that we already stated. We'd like them not to last more than 18 minutes. Please don't be longer than the sermon. We'd like you to have thought about them, even momentarily. The more you think about a thing, the faster you gain mastery. We'd like you to be composed. Are those your preferences? Every head should be nodding, because I know they are. How about that? That's everything you've all just said for the last 36 minutes. You want to reword it, rephrase it, change terminologies? I'm incorporating some of what Gene has said over the last couple of weeks as we talked about corporate structure and singing and order of worship. So now that we have called you together, what does Jesus do every time a crowd forms? Settle down, settle down. Take a knee, which was actually kind of the opposite of that time. He should have been sitting and they should all be standing, but he's kind. Break up into manageable groups, if it's a large group of people, and listen. And that's what God says to do at the Transfiguration, right? This is my son. Listen. That's the takeaway. Not the glowiness, not who was there. Listen. Is that right? It can do a lot of things. I think it does that specifically. And then someone said that. It was me. Pay attention to the capitalization. Is that not who you are? Is that not our purpose? Is that not your function? And your only requirement is to do it as far as you can reach. You don't have to save the world. You don't have to, with the analogy is mowing lawns, you don't have to mow every lawn in the world, but you might want to help your neighbors mow theirs. That's it. So I think it looks like that. Not a lot of scripture about opening and closing prayer. But our tradition and preference on the topic are overwhelming. So the overlap is little, but your emotional attachment to it is large, and that's why there's two colored circles. Just be careful with it. Yes, ma'am. So Elizabeth said three things. I'm gonna agree with two and then ask if I can change one. So she said that all of the prayer and all of the singing is our worship to God. That's us presenting ourselves as the gift, and God as the giver, and thanking Him for us even being here and who He is. Then she said that the sermon is education. That's the one I'll disagree with, because our sermons are based on a lot of New Testament scripture. The sermon is actually supposed to be worship in the form of telling the story of God and His Son as worship. I repeat to you back your story. I repeat to you back your history. I repeat to you back and emphasize your love for me. I think it's worship, because we're meeting the same requirement as the first two. And then the Lord's Supper. We perceive that to be the directed part of worship as a foundation for never forgetting the rest of it you're supposed to do. You can't forget God if you are remembering the sacrifice. And so we do it frequently and often. And so that constitutes worship because we're recognizing the purpose of Christ, who came so that, oh, we're about to be profound, who came so that the flawed product that is me could be with a Creator who loves me. And it's my mistake that I can't be there, not his. Are we good with all that, Elizabeth? Yes. Okay. Ma'am.
I think, and I say this after coming back from my week at camp on cruise, I think that we have a responsibility as far as the sermon goes too, that we need to search ourselves and search Scripture. And that's what we talked about all week at camp, was that we have a responsibility on ourselves because we are men preaching and we're not always perfect. So we also have to take a responsibility on ourselves to search the Scripture too.
Right. I love it every summer when all of our campers come back, because they're charged with a couple of things that we should, remember repeatedly. And in this case, the comment was, remember your part of that sermon. We're charged to check the information we're given. To blindly accept something as Scripture without validation is a fault on your part. In the same way that going on the internet and getting bad information and accepting that without validating it is a sin on your part. An intellectual sin. I don't know that it's in Scripture at all. But we are charged. You are responsible for your relationship with God. Everyone else can help and assist. It is your relationship. And that is what God will call you on when you stand in front of Him on your judgment day. Does Christ say, welcome, good and faithful friend? Or does He say, depart, I know you not? And it's not based on your knowing Ray Fuller. Unless I was the one who helped you get in the water, and then I get to cheer from the sidelines when He says, yes, come in. Yes, ma'am.
When we talk about comfort, being comfortable, preference, tradition, when we travel, we try to worship wherever we're at. And they mix things up, they don't do things like we do. But we know we're in the Church of Christ. We know we are where we're supposed to be. We have friends that was traveling, they found the Church of Christ, but when they went in, they knew immediately with things that were said, and it didn't have to do with the order, it had to do with the fact that they were not spiritual. And they, rather than just staying there and listening, they left.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to borrow just part of it for a little bit of talking for a moment, and then we must close. So whose fault is it if you judge a book by its cover? The reader. Just because it says Church of Christ on the front door. And I'll be honest, when I am out in the world, I don't look for a Church of Christ. I look for the closest church. Because I want to be with Christians. And I can't always go to that closest church because some books, am I going to contradict myself? Some churches I just know I'm not going to. Can I say that? But I want to be with a like-minded body of believers. And there aren't always churches of Christ everywhere I travel in the Army. We can go to some pretty tiny places. But there's always a church. I have to be watchful and mindful of myself. And I have to accept that when I walk in, they'll do things differently. My baseline for rejection is whether or not it's scriptural. And so if you walk in and it's utter chaos, or they're saying some things that just aren't in Scripture, as Scripture, probably time to make a decision. But all of that to say that I think, I'm working words, travel. I'll say it that way, travel. You must go see other Christians around the world. You must. You have no idea, if you stay in this congregation all your life, about the trials, tribulations, troubles, and the way that they worship there. You must. It's a personal opinion. I won't hold you to it, but I think you'll be a better person for it. And you live in a very large country that you can travel freely in. They worship differently in different parts of it, and it'll say Church of Christ on the front door. But all that stuff will challenge you and give you strength in your relationship with God. So, That was opening and closing prayer. Now you know why you have them. You should be prepared to give one. We'll just run everybody across the podium, and we'll test you here in the next 4 minutes. So start writing down your prayer. That's right. I are done. We're going to break the next topic up into at least 2. The topic was deacons and elders. We're going to cover them separately. All right. We're complete. Thank you for your time.